You mentioned there the St George's flag, and Emily Formby, that famous tweet. But in your book also you talk about England. You talk, I think, the depossession of England. I think you call the chapter. But these things are not generally talked about. Not even just by the Labour Party, but I mean England as an entity is very rarely discussed. But you actually do go into it, don't you, in the book?
Yeah, and I think there is, without question, a more acute feeling of national dispossession within England than anywhere else. I mean, if you look at Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, many people on the left see that kind of nationalism as more permissible. We can live with that sort of nationalism because we accept that it's progressive in a way. But any kind of display of English nationalism plainly harks back to empire and can only come from some sort of innate racism, so we've got to try to clamp down on that. And I think people in these English, particularly working class communities, who do feel a sense of patriotism, often feel that they're not entitled to express that in any sort of explicit English way. And I think that's why, certainly in terms of the Brexit vote, for example, the Brexit vote was higher in the English working class communities than it was in working class communities in other countries. And in fact, I refer in the book to the writer Anthony Barnett, who drew a comparison between Wigan in England and Paisley, I think it was, in Scotland, where he talks that in many ways these two towns were quite similar in terms of population, in terms of industry that was once there and which it lost. But when you look at the Brexit vote, it was sharply different, with Wigan obviously being strongly for Leave and Paisley being strongly for Remain. And I think that does help us to understand, why the English working class particularly do feel that sense of alienation, because it's almost as if their own culture is discouraged. And Professor Eric Kaufman, who wrote a book called White Shift, describes to a certain degree this phenomenon quite well when he talks about something called asymmetrical multiculturalism, where he says that in some of those traditional working class communities, people are lectured about the need to kind of open themselves up to other cultures and to be amenable to other cultures and to see the benefits of other cultures and this kind of liberal cosmopolitan vibe. But when it comes to their own culture, the liberal establishment takes a completely opposite view and says, well, actually, that kind of old Anglo-Saxon working class culture, we don't really want you to display that. You need to be open to everybody else, but you can't really display any sense of pride in your own culture. And people are not stupid. They see the disproportionate focus on other cultures and the sneering at their own, and they think, actually, this is not fair. And often the only way that people have got to manifest their anger and resentment at that is through the ballot box. And that's why I think Brexit was so instructive, because in a way where with a general election, people will often usually vote for one of the two parties, and often there's not much difference between the two main parties, and people decide not to vote for those reasons, or if they do, they still don't really think they can affect change in a serious way through a general election. Well, when Brexit came along, and it was a straight binary yes or no, and millions of people who, yes, were anti-EU, but often not in a vociferous way, which is why I argue that the Brexit vote was as much a vote against the UK establishment as it was against the EU. And people just felt, well, hold on a second, we've been given this weapon, and for the first time in our lives, we've got the opportunity to really fire back at the establishment and to rock the establishment in a way that they hadn't had that opportunity previously, and may have been their only opportunity for their lifetimes. And many of them voted for the first time and thought, right, you're going to get it. This is my only opportunity to tell you what I think. You've been treating me with disdain for the last 20 or 30 years. You've been ignoring my legitimate concerns and anxieties. And take that and deal with it. And it was a genuine democratic revolt in that way. The left should have embraced it, but it didn't. It tried to subvert it, it rejected it, it tried to dismiss it as racism, and it paid a huge price for that.